I always came here with my mum, or with mum and dad as a youngster. So I don't really remember the first show I saw. I came to Panto. I can remember coming with the school and seeing Charles Hawtrey here, you know, the guy from the Carry On films, and that would have been early in my life. But my earliest memory is I remember on a Saturday going to the vets to see the Swans with my dad, coming out of the football, meeting up with my mum, and going to the Cascade restaurant, which was up by JT Morgan's, for tea, and then coming to see Richard Todd in a play. And for me, to see the guy who was in 633 Squadron was massive. He was the most famous person I'd ever seen on stage. And then in my teenage years, I used to come every single week and even see genres of theatre which I personally may not have been interested in. I'd come to see the Northern Dance Company, the Welsh National Opera. I saw Bowen. I saw David Jason here in a play long before Only Fools and Horses. So all the way through my teenage years, probably from the age of 14 to 19, and when I went away to college, I would have been here every single week, and I could afford it because for part of that time, Steve James, who was the marketing officer, I knew him, and he said, look, if you give me a couple of hours taking all the posters around the shops in Swansea, I'll give you 2 free tickets for the opening night, because then everything was on a weekly basis. Very rarely were there one-nighters. Most things would come here, even if they opened on a Tuesday and went on to the weekend. And I can even remember Warren Mitchell in The Thoughts of Chairman Alf, when somebody came up on stage and punched him one. And we got to talk about that when I was on the radio later, many years later, and he still remembered that night. I was performing in school plays, school musicals in Duneva, in the city centre, and I'd done variety shows in a church hall in Danagraig, which I passed many times and have fond memories. But my first time on a big theatre stage was here at the Grand, and I joined Swansea Amateur Operatic Society to get stage time and to do stuff, because there weren't the youth and the young people's drama schools that are around today. I was in West Glamorgan Youth Music, West Glamorgan Youth Choir, and Swansea Amateurs were doing Showboat, and you wouldn't believe how popular they were. You couldn't get a ticket for the Swansea Amateur show unless you knew someone who was in the company, who was in the society, who would get you tickets on their sheet. And I did 2 shows with them. I did Showboat and Brigadoon, and then I came here. My first solo here was in Kismet with Gendros Amateurs Society, and I came here with Abbey Players as well. I had no shame. I'd sell my talents to anybody, and I think probably I did 5 or 6 of those amateur shows here. And for me, to walk out on to the stage of the Grand was massive, but to come through the stage door, which that was very, very special. I knew what it was, an amateur show. I didn't have any pretensions of, and I was in the chorus anyway, or the ensemble, but it was a real joy to come and to be in a dressing room here, and it was a lot of fun as well. We had great fun, particularly the youngsters who were all here because they wanted to get stage time. Panto here has been part of my life for a long, long time. It all started, I'd done summer season. I was doing summer season at the Grand Pavilion in Porthcawl, and Roger, who was the entertainment manager, came to me and said, look, we're finishing the contract with Stan Stennett, and from next year we're going to produce in-house. We'll book the producer, the director, we'll book the writer, which was a wonderful man called Norman Robbins, sadly no longer with us, who was just incredible and had worked with everybody and told great stories. So my first panto was Aladdin, and I did 4 pantos at the Pavilion, and every year the then manager Gary Isles and his assistant Gerald Morris used to come and see the show and say, look, keep at it, your chance will come. And then I got a phone call from Nick Thomas, who at the time was Artist Management Group, and I'd kind of known Nick for a long time because I knew him when he was a puppeteer, and I'd come to the Patty Pavilion and I was working there, and they give me a role as one of Robin Hood's Merry Men, which was a comedy role, but a kind of small role in Robin Hood with Little and Large and Ruth Maddock, wonderful people. I just learned. And then the following year, I didn't get asked back here. But then in 1999, which was the Millennium Panto, they asked me if I'd play the Emperor of China in Aladdin, which is quite amusing because one of the reviews was, I think, an amateur magazine who said, we don't know who, I didn't know the artist playing the Emperor of China, but he was very popular because he had a huge cheer when he walked out on stage, but he sounded more like a Welsh potter than the Emperor of China. Welsh accent, see? And I've been here ever since. I've done every panto, and in that panto, Paul Elliott, who was one of the producers, came on the producers' night, knocked on the door, and came in. And all he said was, next year, Dame. And he walked away, and that was it. And apart from 1 year where there was no Dame in the panto, I played Dame every year since, even if it's Ugly Sister, which strictly speaking isn't, I don't see that as a traditional Dame role, but I've been blessed to have been in every single panto since 1999. That first panto really was an amazing experience, and I think walking out onto the stage as a professional was massive, but walking into the rehearsal room on the first day, the meet and greet, which would have probably been held in this room where we are now, and seeing Little and Large, Mark Cameron, who was in Emmerdale, Sarah Vanderberg, who'd been in Neighbours, and dear Ruth Maddock, and Mike Burns, who was in the British Empire playing Colin. I think I was the only person on the poster that I'd never heard of. Everybody else was incredibly famous. But it was a great learning experience, and it also, it wasn't a one-nighter at the Grand. That panto went on until February, and it was quite exhausting because I was also doing the breakfast show at Swansea Sound at the time. So I'd go in there for 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd do 3 hours live, and during that 3 hours I'd be recording my last hour so I could get down here in time for rehearsals. Rehearsal call is usually 10 o'clock, so I'd leave there just after 9. I'd nip home, get my stuff, and because I live close to the radio station, I'd come down here, and I did that for many years, up until 2019, 2020, and I did find the last panto here, which sadly was cut short because of COVID. I found it a lot easier that I wasn't doing radio. I'd left the radio at the time, so it was a lot easier. And I felt it was probably one of my best performances because I wasn't tired. And when I went home at night, I didn't have to prepare for the following day. I could go home, I could have tea, I could relax, I could do lines, I could watch telly, I could do the things that people do after work. So that made it a lot easier. And I enjoyed that panto experience probably most of all, even though sadly, because of COVID, they closed us down on Christmas Eve. Norman Robbins, who I mentioned, was our director, writer and dame at the Porthcawl Pavilion. Porthcawl is a great panto town. People come down from the valleys, and Pavilion is a great panto theatre. And Norman, there's not much to do in Porthcawl in the winter, so we would all stay together, have tea together, between matinees, and the evening show, and Norman would just tell incredible stories. He had worked with everyone. He told a story of a young, how as a young chorus boy, he'd had an idea, and he'd shared it with Eric Morecambe, and Eric Morecambe called Ernie Wise over, and Eric Morecambe said, "That's a great idea, but I tell you what, we won't do it, you do it," which I thought was incredibly generous. And they didn't act like stars. And he would tell stories when he toured with Hilda Baker and Jimmy Jewell, who apparently didn't like each other, didn't get on at all. And how one week it would be Hilda Baker and Jimmy Jewell, the following week it would be Jimmy Jewell and Hilda Baker, and one day there was a commotion outside the theatre, and they caught Hilda Baker on a stepladder measuring her letters to make sure they weren't smaller than Jimmy Jewell's letters. But here at the Grand, man, when you work with Ruth Maddock, who not only has done panto, but if you look backstage here at the Grand, you see some of the plays that she's come here, and I remember, she's just one of the remarkable stage performers. Don't just think of her in Heidi High and stuff like that. She has done the most incredible plays and musicals in the West End and on tour. And I used to watch, and I remember her being on stage as the fairy doing the poems, and a pyrotechnic had gone off and set fire to the curtains. And she's just dealt with it. There was a kid in the front row shouting, "Miss, fire, miss, fire!" And one of the guys here, Bomber, who was the lightning guy, just walked on stage with a soda siphon and put the fire out. And she wasn't put off by that at all. And then you work with Vicky Michelle, and Vicky was such a joy to work with. And when I was blessed to get the MPE later years, Vicky had one exactly the same day, and she's never forgiven me for not putting a Buckingham Palace glass in her bag. I wouldn't do it, for they'd kick us out. But she was just incredible, and Gillian Tailforth, who was in EastEnders, was incredible. And then you just work with people who have done this for so many years, and then you get to a point where you realise you've become the person who's done this for so many years. And I'm no expert, I'm no master. I don't put myself in the same league as these people. I remember giving Ruth a lift back from London after a Panther poster photo session. We were working for the same company but in different Panthers. And my daughter, who was going off to drama school, learnt so much in that journey, from London back to Llandarcy, where her dear late husband John was picking it up. But now youngsters do come to you for advice. They do ask you, and I always want to see youngsters do well, and nothing gives me greater joy when you see a youngster who you've worked with make the West End or get a lead part in a tour. That for me is I'm never envious, I'm never jealous. I think good on you. You go for it, and it gives me joy. And even Mike Doyle, Mike and I have learnt so much from each other. Mike could look at my eyes and see it how I was, and we knew what each other were thinking. And I still think one of the best panto double acts, and there've been many, but Welsh panto double acts. I'm not being, please don't take this the wrong way, but I think that Mike and I were one of the great double acts because we worked so well together. Me as his mum, and him as my boy. And I love him to bits. I love working with him. He's giving, he's kind, he's generous on stage, and he's a huge talent. And if you had to say who have you enjoyed working with the best, it's the Panthers that I've done with Mike over the years. You see, Norman Robbins always used to say to me, "You should play bottom." And I used to say, "I'm not an actor." And he would argue with that. And I would argue with him about that. And I did eventually get to play bottom in a Midsummer Night's Dream in a wonderful tour out of the Pontardawe Arts Centre, which went to 7 or 8 theatres in Wales. But Peter Richards, who was the artistic, or is the artistic director of Llewellyn, came to me and said, we're doing a play about the Swans, and I'd love you to be in it, to play Vicar Joe in Toshak or me. And I had the most incredible experience. And that gave me confidence. I then went in to work with Michael Bogdanov on tour with Amazing Grace, with the Wales Theatre Company. But it all started with Toshak or me. And what gave me the greatest buzz about Toshak or me, Llewellyn were a marvellous, incredible theatre company. Peter Richards is nothing short of a genius. They played the Arts Wing, and it had been such a success in the Arts Wing that the management here rebooked it for the main stage. And it was a joy to see football fans, Swans fans, come into the theatre, not ask for the box office, ask where the ticket office was, and not talk about the interval, but saying, how long's half time? And make possibly their first ever visit to the theatre. And that put Llewellyn on the main stage, and I was blessed to do Under Milk Wood with them, and a load of productions on Hobson's Choice, which was one of my favourites, set in Manchester. And by then I had the confidence to be the actor that Norman Robbins always said was in me, and I think it was Llewellyn that brought it out. And all our tours would always start here in the Grand before we went off and visited the many theatres that Wales has, and Wales is blessed to have many theatres, and I'm blessed to have played the New Theatre, the Wales Millennium Centre, and what a class to be the #1 theatres in Wales. But there is nothing like the Swansea Grand. And I always say to people 2 things. If you can do one of 2 things when you're working here, particularly in Panto, to the youngsters, is to go out on the stage when the auditorium is empty and look out and see what is, without doubt, the most beautiful auditorium that any theatre could have. You can't build that today. And I also encourage them to do something which now many directors do, is go to the very last row in the upper circle and say, you play to these people. Don't play to the front rows. Play to those people up there, because if you play up there, then you play these guys anyway. But don't make them feel left out. Don't make them think they're in the cheap seats, because they're not. And play to them. And I suppose those are the 2 pieces of old man advice that I give to youngsters today, is just walk out on that stage, see how beautiful that theatre is, and what a privilege it is to work in a venue such as the Swansea Grand. One of the great things about Hobson's Choice, I got to do a Manchester accent, but I got to work on stage with my daughter Bethan, who played one of my daughters. And in latter years, I got to see her perform in the Grand with Llewellyn. And we did As You Like It, which is one of my favourite Shakespeare plays. We did that together. But walking out onto that main house in the Swansea Grand, knowing that your daughter is in the same show as you, that for me as a father was probably one of the biggest buzzes I've ever had in this theatre, is seeing Bethan Johns' name in the programme and seeing Bethan walk out on stage to take the applause of the audience. And she was damn good as well.